So in the interest of time, we are going to attempt to start on time and keep things running smoothly for our friendly organisers. So welcome to an admin's guide to Git, hopefully showing that source control isn't that scary and isn't just for developers. So I'm Rob Cowell. I'm the DevOps avocado. No. ChatGPT's got it wrong again. I am the DevOps advocate at Gearset. I've been there about a year. Prior to that, I was a Salesforce developer, Salesforce architect, and general dog's body. So I've been on kind of both sides of the ecosystem. So hopefully, I should be able to feel some of your pain points. So today, we're going to look at source control, specifically for using Git. And historically, it's always been perceived as one of these things that's predominantly in the developer and or architect space. But hopefully, by the end of today's session, I'll be able to show you that actually it has a lot of value for admins as well. So the first question, as you can see from the slide, is why do I need source control? And there's a lot of advantages to that. At the sort of very entry-level end of things, it allows you to keep your changes backed up and safe, although please don't use it as your sole backup. As we'll see, there are a lot of disadvantages to doing that. But you also have an audit trail of your changes beyond what the Salesforce logs give you, and it allows you to much more easily share your changes and your work in flight between environments. And that change doesn't have to be code. It's your config, as we'll see in a moment. So firstly, what is this Git that I keep going on about, and why does it have that stupid name? So Git was created by the same guy that created Linux, the operating system, Linus Torvalds. And he explains it as a distributed version control system that tracks changes in source code during software development, blah, 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 blah. But basically, he described it as, I've called it Git because I have a habit of naming things after myself, and I'm a bit of a Git. But what it does allow you to do effectively is track changes in files. Okay? And if we think of metadata as files, then suddenly that makes a lot more sense in a Salesforce context. Because everything is a file, whether it's your flows, whether it's your validation rules, your Apex code and triggers, your objects, everything that Salesforce allows us to get out as a file, and we'll come back to that in a moment, we can actually store in source control. So it's kind of key to think of everything as being a file. Now, here comes the tricky bit. So we have got a fairly short session today, so I'm going to make the most of the live demo, and we will try and demonstrate how everything's a file and why everything is a file. So this is a session aimed at admins, but please don't be scared by the fact that it says Visual Studio Code. It's just a really useful and handy tool for working with metadata. So what we're going to quickly do here is we're going to create a new project. And I'm just checking the screen size. Good for everybody? Wonderful. All righty. We're in danger territory now. I have my lucky demo t-shirt on today, so hopefully things will go just fine. And I'm just going to create a little project in there. If it all goes horribly wrong, at least you know it was live. So one of the first things that we want to do as the project starts up is kind of talk about what we want to actually pull from our Salesforce org. Now, at this point, we're not even connected to a Salesforce org. So one of the first jobs that we want to do after it's built out a brief skeleton is to point it at a Salesforce org. So we can say, OK, I want to authorize an org to work with. Very simple. We just want to log into it. Now, don't be scared by production here. Developer edition always comes up as production. It scares people. Salesforce, what are you doing? Here we go. Let's make that a little bigger as well. Just double check no one can see my secret passwords. So it's basically here, it's just asking, can I have access to your org for working with it? Sounds good to me. There we go, we're into our org. Now at this point, we come back over here. We can see we've successfully authorized our org. So now, within this environment, we can just work back and forth between the local environment and with Salesforce. It's a good place to be. So, one of the key concepts that we have when working here is telling the tooling and the environment what we actually want to get from our Salesforce org. Now, I would strongly recommend that we don't get absolutely everything. Tempting as that may be, and particularly for the folks that are thinking, okay, let's just get everything and then we can back it up. Yeah, don't do that. I'm just going to move that out of the way a moment. So what I want to do, by default, when you kind of build out one of these projects, it just says, like, grab all the Apex-y type things. Most of the time, it's Visual Studio Code. It's going to be code that people are working with in here, but it doesn't have to be, as we'll see. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and tell it to fetch the account object. I want to tell it what type of objects I'm getting, and I want to tell it which objects to get. Like so. Okay, and I'm going to say, okay, this particular object is an account. Sorry, no, wrong way around. It's a custom object. But wait, you say, account isn't a custom object, it's a standard object. Yeah, I don't know why Salesforce did that. Every object in the org, whether it's standard or custom, for the purposes of pulling the metadata out, is treated as a custom object. Okay, so quickly covering what we've done here, this is what's called our manifest, and this is basically what's telling the toolchain what to go and fetch from our org. Okay, so I will remember to save it, that always helps. Okay, quick right click, and I can say, if my eyesight serves me right, retrieve the source in the manifest from the org. And if the demo gods are smiling upon us today, it will do exactly that. Wow, that was quick. Suspiciously quick. Let's go and have a look and see what we've got out of our org. So if we look in this horribly nested folder structure here, probably do a refresh. Yeah, I told you it was suspiciously quick, and the demo gods have not been good to us because it hasn't fetched my account. Ah, there we go. See, look, people are paying attention. I was just testing you, obviously. Yeah, I got it, yeah. Thank you, folks. This is why we get the smartest people in the ecosystem to come to London's Calling, you see. Just to keep our sessions working. So, meanwhile, back in our manifest. I've done this session a few times, and every time I forget one thing. It still doesn't look like it did that. Yep, well done. At the end of the day, the person who I can't see because of the bright lights is going to get a prize. It's Claire, yeah, okay. Right. That's looking better. Look, it's all sorts of little text and things. Wonderful. Okay, so, meanwhile, we can go to our objects. There we go. So we have our account object. Success. We have our fields, we have our list views, and we have our web links. Okay. Not overly bothered with any of those right this moment, but it does demonstrate how they come out. So we can see the fields on account, they're all nice in their own little files. Oh, wait, files. We've got this thing that's very good at tracking files. So let's see what we can do with that. So on this part of the tools that Visual Studio Code comes with, we have source control. Now, the source control that's baked into Visual Studio Code is very much designed to work with Git. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen it working with anything else. So we can initialize a little repository to keep all of our code. Ta-da, it's done. It's that quick. Now, as I said earlier, we don't want to add everything. It's very tempting to do so. But what we actually want to do is kind of get into the discipline of adding things that are likely to change through our efforts. Now, I say through our efforts There are in Salesforce things like sharing tables, there are all sorts of logs, and tables that are very high volume and generated automatically by the system. Doesn't make a lot of sense to back those up. So what we're going to do, we're just going to add our accounts. We're just going to get the whole folder and just say, yep, add that in, I'm good. So you can see here, that's staged. Staging is the first part of that life cycle of moving things to Git, okay? And at this point, everything is still local. So I'm going to add a little message to say what I'm doing, initial commit, and I'm going to commit that. So that is basically stamping those changes that we've said, yes, I'm building up my list of artifacts that I want to put in. A concept sort of familiar to change sets. Please don't use change sets. And then we're actually saying, yes, I'm done. This is what I actually want to commit into my Git. Now, at this point, it hasn't gone anywhere. Okay? We've not deployed it to org. We've not deployed it to the cloud, so it's not really a backup or a copy of our changes. No one can see it. No one else can pick those changes up. It's less useful. And this is where we get into the next stage of our process. And we're in full screen mode, so I can't see my tabs. Okay, I'm just going to go. I had this all set up, but my eyesight is going somewhat. Okay, let's jump out of full screen. That's probably the easiest way to do this. No, can't do that either. What is going on? If anyone's looking to submit talks next year, don't do live demos. It's dangerous. OK, we are back in business. So I'm going to create a new GitHub project. So GitHub is a hosting service for Git repositories, and it's generally the market leader. Others are available, of course, but most folks will be using GitHub as their off-platform store it in the cloud piece. So we're going to create a new repository for our work, and we shall probably give it a name as soon as I can see the fields. There we go. Yep, LC23 demo, very original. Okay, now, what's actually happened here is quite strategic. We have our local repository that's hooked up to VS Code, that's over here. And then we have our GitHub repository. That's over here. And this is where the magic is about to happen, hopefully. So what we want to do is effectively push all that code over from one to the other. Okay, we're going to start from here and hopefully end up here. So, and push is a very deliberate choice of word, because as luck would have it, that's the actual commands that we want. Now, we're not going to go full command line too much, only a little bit. I just need to tell it two little pieces. It's not playing ball here. There we go. Now, all this command line stuff, don't let it scare you. There is a reason, and it all will become clear. But in the short term, okay, right, we're in good shape now, and we just need to tell it. We've done that, we've done that, we've done that. Okay, cool. So, at this point, we've got our code locally, we've set up everything remotely, we've told them where each other are. We should be able to just push that one across. There's a few ways of doing that. There's a nice little button down here. There's the command palette with all sorts of commands there. You can git push on there. Whichever way works, but it's doing effectively the same job. We're just going to push that over. And again, if it's playing ball, there we go. All the how to get started messaging has disappeared. And let me make that a little bigger for folks. So what we'll see here is our account object has appeared with our stuff. So mission accomplished so far. Now, coming back to the slides, I've got over the shock of a live demo. Okay, so what have we actually seen there? Let's have a little bit of a recap without peering at very dark code. So we've seen that Visual Studio Code and the Salesforce command line play nicely together. They're designed to do so. And they're really useful tools for working with your metadata. Even as an admin, we saw that we pulled out fields, we pulled out list views, we pulled out effectively, the basics of a brand new account object. We haven't really customized much on there, but you can see how if you change something on the org, you just pull it back down again and then push it into your Git. Okay, so for Git and GitHub, it's a mechanism of storing those changes and being able to track the history on them. If we look back to there, if we were to make any changes here and then re-push that, you'd see version history. If you've ever worked with like Word documents where you're seeing a tracked document, such and such a person edited this word, corrected my bad, terrible typing and spelling, that's the kind of approach that it's going to do for your code as well. So very useful. And as you become more advanced with these types of processes, you can get into the big D, DevOps, which is kind of automating how do we move it from there across to our Salesforce orgs, up through our environments, automate the testing. There's a world of possibilities, but all of it starts from these basic fundamentals of source control. We then looked at the basic life cycle. So it says checkout there. Checkout was basically pulling down our code there and then hooking it up to Git to say, I'm ready to start making some changes there. If it's an existing Git repository, then you would check out. You'd check out the existing code to make sure that you're up to date with changes from your other admins, developers, or anyone else that fancies having a go at Salesforce. You make your changes. When you're good to go, you would then commit them. Always please do add a commit message, because that's your opportunity to explain what that change represents, why you're doing it, and it just allows, if you want to sort of trace back and have a degree of accountability, it's a very useful technique for doing that, without having to dive into the actual metadata itself. So this was a very basic life cycle, but it kind of shows you the basic of, I get it from my org, and I put it into Git. And then, as we've kind of progressed on this journey, potentially you would be, as you're doing the deployments, I get it from my Git and I put it into my org. So you've got this two-way connection of being able to work with your changes in a very safe way. And when I say safe, using source control allows you to do great things such as rollbacks, partial changes, being able to tie some of those things into user stories. I don't know if anyone was in the Elements Cloud DevOps Center session this morning, but having that degree of, this is an item of work that I want to work with. These are the changes that represent the work I've done against that requirement, and now I'm going to deliver it. So there's a lot to be said for example, in those commit comments, just making a note of the JIRA item. And a lot of systems will automate that process for you. So there are a lot of things to worry about later, and worry is probably a strong term, but I'm kind of framing it in the context of, don't worry about it now, just get the basics handled. We can sort out all the complex stuff later. So I know from just kind of looking out at the audience, there are some devs and architects and pretty advanced folks in here. Thanks for attending. I know you probably know all of this stuff anyway. But there are things like branching, where you're saying, okay, I want to take the main copy of the code and kind of split it off, work on my thing, and then fold those changes back in again later, so that I'm not corrupting or polluting, or there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but basically I'm not affecting the main stable branch that I know that if I was to deploy this today, it's going to work in my orgs. Okay, so it's your working area. They're called feature branches. But then once you've done those, you've got to merge them in, which is the next point, merging things. Oh, but wait, my admin's made this change, and my other admin's made this change, my developers made this change, and they've all both my admins have worked on the account object. Who wins? And that's where the resolving conflicts in. It's not literally fisticuffs in the office. It's not that kind of conflict. It's just looking at the metadata, and again, everything's a file. So you can look at the files and say, okay, this bit relates to his change, and this bit relates to her change, and actually, yeah, they can coexist, and I'll select this piece and this piece, and you get to a cohesive and coherent set of changes in your Salesforce org. So that was a very whistle-stop tour of Git. Now, there's a couple of areas that will help with that learning, particularly for admin folks. So Trailhead, the kind of de facto Salesforce learning resource, has a Git and GitHub Basics module, which is pretty good, and it's a little high level, much like my session here, but it does allow you to kind of reinforce that learning and start getting the fundamental concepts there. And then there's also DevOps Launchpad, which is quite similar to Trailhead in that it's self-paced learning, it's free, it's modules, there are little badges and certificates and things that you can do on there. But as the name suggests, it's much more focused on DevOps, specifically Salesforce DevOps. So, complete free resource. Go and have a look at that one. Grab some more badges. I know the Salesforce community loves earning badges. But what I wanted to do on here, and I haven't got it on the slide because it's kind of occurred to me over the course of today, is a lot of folks might be thinking, well, why do I need this? We've got DevOps Center now. We've got this nice little pipeline flow diagram thing, or we've got tools like GearSet, we've got tools like Cowell, we've got tools like Flow, and all the others. Why do I need why is he showing me all this command line stuff? The reason that I've done this is because I think it's kind of useful to understand what those tools are doing behind the scenes, okay? And we've kind of gone through this, pull it from here, push it to there, pull it from there, push it to here. And you can see kind of how that whole life cycle works. Some of you have seen the classic figure of 8 loop or the circle diagram that others have used. It's kind of illustrating what are these tools doing for me? How, it's abstracting it away in a nice UI, but sometimes to really cement a concept, I think it's kind of useful to see, what it's doing behind the scenes. So if you are looking to use some of those tools, whether it's DevOps Center, GearSet, Flow, all the others, I think it's useful to kind of know what you're getting yourself into a little bit. So with that said, I've come in 3 minutes early. Yes. Any questions for anyone? Hi.
You mentioned how you don't save everything, all the files that get changed.
Yep.
So I know Git, you can ignore certain files. Do you have a useful list of files to ignore?
Yes and no. So there's kind of two approaches to that. I'm going to sneak out from behind my pedestal now because I can. So there's a couple of approaches to that. One is like what I think of as the system level approach. So I don't need my .sfdx something folder. I don't need all the other sort of cruft that comes with building that project out. Most of the time, those are automatically added. And so you've got a git ignore that covers that. But from the other side of the coin of, what objects should I not care about? There's a couple of approaches. One is build it up over time and only start populating that with objects that you're changing. And over time, that will grow, but it's the stuff that you actually care about. So that's one approach. To specifically answer your question around, is there a list somewhere? We have a list on our support documentation. So full disclaimer, I work for GearSet. We are a DevOps vendor. A lot of our content on the documentation is applicable across the board. It's not always necessarily GearSet specific and DevOps Launchpad. So there's definitely some articles that will talk about, these are your kind of core objects and metadata items that we would recommend as your starting point. And depending on your business use cases, that's going to change. If you're using CPQ, if you're using field service, all these kind of additional things, that's going to change it up a little bit there for you. Thomas.
When you did your, that's loud. When you did your demo, you selected a public repository, but are there any dangers when you're creating a public repository?
Yeah, that one I know is safe because it's just a brand new developer edition org, and I'm doing a demo and I'm trying to get through this thing as quickly as possible. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, private repositories on GitHub, wherever you can, unless you actually do want to share code with people on the internet at large, which, from a business perspective, you probably don't do. Yeah, that was just purely for demo, but you're absolutely right. Private repositories gives you that degree of control and access to your intellectual property crown jewels, as it were. Just through there, I can just about see. Is that Nathan?
Hi, it's Nathaniel. Lovely demo. Thank you. I was just wondering if you had any tips for doing all of that when there are multiple admins would you say you're all using the same Git repository and, you know, and you're pulling and pushing into there, and then, you know, obviously later on we'll be talking about conflicts and whatever, but that's something to look at later. But, you know, to start with, is it one Git, or would you recommend?
Okay, I think this is probably some overdue terminology. I'm going to grab the hat so I don't have to use the hand. You know, avocado jokes notwithstanding. Just makes it easier to filter the lights out. So yeah, there's a few bits of terminology. So your big bucket of everything is your repository. Okay, as we saw there, that's kind of where you're storing things. But what you can actually do is have versions of that. Okay, these are the branches. And what we generally suggest for folks that are first coming into this way of working is what we call the feature branch model. So I am working on a feature, hence the name. I will take a cut from the main repository, the main branch, and I will work on my feature. And then I know that I'm not kind of interrupting anybody else's work. Okay, my work is being checked into that branch, and then my colleague over here is working on their branch because they're working on a completely different feature. It might not even, hopefully, might not even touch the same objects. And then when the work's done and it's been tested and we're good to go, then we can merge that back in again onto that main branch. So there's isolation in terms of the feature branches so that you don't trip over each other's toes. And then there's consolidation where you're kind of aggregating the changes, you know, whether you want to do that when it's ready, whether you want to kind of stack them up because you're working on a 2 or 3 week sprint model and you've got a bunch of user stories and changes that you want to go in. Both models are valid, but yeah, branches is definitely how you would do that, and that's the terminology there. And again, you know, slight shameless plug, and I'm slightly over time. Pop over to DevOps Launchpad. There's a whole section and certification and everything around effective branching strategies on there as well. Okay, we are now over time. I'm around most of the day. My colleagues are on the gear set booth in these lovely bright yellow polo shirts. They will answer questions for you as well as I. And thank you for coming along.